Washington minus thousands of scientists and their supporters, feeling increasingly threatened by the policies of President Trump, gathered in Washington on Saturday under rainy skies for what they called the March for Science, abandoning a tradition of keeping the sciences out of politics, and calling on the public to stand up for scientific enterprise. Mona Hanna-Attisha, a pediatrician who helped expose lead poisoning in Flint, Mic, and who addressed a rally before the march, called the protest the beginning of a movement to ensure that governments do not dismiss or deny science. If we want to prevent future Flints, we need to embrace what we've learned and how far we've come in terms of science and technology drive, Hanna-Attisha said in an interview. The demonstration in Washington was echoed by protests in hundreds of other cities across the United States and around the world, including marches in Europe and the Asia Pacific. The Washington rally started on Saturday morning, with thousands of people packing into the National Mall, some wearing white lab coats and ponchos on a day that got only rainier as speakers motivated participants to march. Protesters carried signs calling for funding for scientific research. Science is not an alternative fact, some said. Others noted pointedly that Albert Einstein was a refugee. The March for Science evolved from a social media campaign into an effort to get people onto the streets for the cause of science. Its organizers were motivated by Mr. Trump, who as a presidential candidate disparaged climate change as a hoax and cast suspicions on the safety of vaccines. Their resolve deepened, they said, when the president appointed cabinet members who seemed hostile to the sciences. He also proposed a budget with severe cuts for agencies like the National Institutes of Health, which would lose 18% of its funding in his blueprint, and the Environmental Protection Agency, which faces a 31% budget cut, and the elimination of a quarter of the agency's 15,000 employees. While traveling by motorcade to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center on Saturday, Mr. Trump passed dozens of demonstrators from the march holding signs, including one that said, "Stop denying the Earth is dying," according to a Pool report. Moments before, the White House had released a statement from Mr. Trump for Earth Day that did not mention the March for Science by name, but appeared directed at its participants, calling science critical to economic growth and environmental protection. He said, "My administration is committed to advancing scientific research that leads to a better understanding of our environment and of environmental risks. As we do so, we should remember that rigorous science depends not on ideology, but on a spirit of honest inquiry and robust debate," he added. Organizers said they hoped the day's demonstrations result in sustained, coordinated action aimed at persuading elected officials to adopt policies consistent with the scientific consensus on climate change, vaccines, and other issues. This has been a living laboratory as scientists and science institutions are willing to take a step outside their comfort zone, outside of the labs and into the public spheres, said Beka Economopoulos, company founder of the pop-up Natural History Museum and an organizer of the march. What began as a movement by scientists for scientists has drawn in many science enthusiasts who have joined efforts to organize the marches. Luis Fabish, 11, who traveled from Chicago with his father for the march in Washington, wore a white lab coat, a green bow tie and a hat with a pink, hand-knit brain. I want to keep people interested in science, he said. Many scientists at the marches said they believed now was the appropriate moment to express themselves politically. They said they feared Mr. Trump may undermine public support for the sciences. I can't think of a time where scientists felt the enterprise of science was being threatened in the way scientists feel now, Naomi Oreskes, a professor of the history of science at Harvard University, said in an interview this week. She was scheduled to speak at a rally in Boston on Saturday. Drive. Oreskes said the closest parallel to Saturday's protests were the demonstrations for nuclear disarmament in the 1950s and 60s. But scientists were then marching against the use of science to build weapons of mass destruction. In New York, demonstrators stretched for 10 blocks along Central Park West, wedged between the park and a line of buildings on a gray and dreary day. Underlining the connection in the minds of many marchers between the Science March, Earth Day and global warming, one participant, Christine Negra, 49, a chemist who works as a consultant on climate change issues, said she would attend next week's People's Climate March, too. In the US, we're lagging in our recognition about how important climate change is, she said. These public events are meant to shake people out of their daily lives so that people see how urgent the problem really is. Many messages at the New York rally took on a political hue. One demonstrator carried a sign with a diagram. "Before you dismiss science, Mr. President," it said, "here is the molecular formula for hairspray." Another said, "Fund science, not walls." And along the marching route, some were heard chanting, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, Donald Trump has got to go," as they passed the Trump International Hotel and Tower at Columbus Circle. For many marchers, especially those in the sciences who were demonstrating for the first time in their lives, political settings can be a source of discomfort, and critics of the march who are in the sciences expressed concern that such displays could be damaging to the field. "I worry the march would drive the wedge deeper," said Robert S. Young, a coastal geologist at Western Carolina University who wrote a New York Times op-ed article in January expressing misgivings about the march. Although Drive. Young planned to support Friends at a satellite demonstration. He said it would be easy for conservatives to say the march was really about supporting liberal policies. "Going to a march is easy," he said. "Spending the next couple of years reinventing how we communicate with Red State America, that's hard." In energy-rich Oklahoma, the home state of Scott Pruitt, the new EPA chief who repeatedly sued the agency when he was state attorney general, a crowd estimated at more than 2,000 by law enforcement officials chanted "Science is real." The demonstrators gathered on a stone plaza before the state capitol, which is fenced and scaffolded for renovation, and they marched on a route that took them around a park that includes 2 restored oil derricks that once pumped oil from a source beneath the capitol. Many at the Oklahoma City March seemed motivated by local issues. Lisa Pitts, a teacher, said she was marching because of concerns about the state's education budget and to support science education. "We are not a poor state," she said. "We should not be 50th in everything." But concerns about the country's direction under Mr. Trump were present there, too. "I don't want to go back to having dirty air and water," said Renee Roy, who formerly worked for the state's environmental regulator and was concerned that Mr. Pruitt's plans for the EPA would harm the country's air and water quality.